Hello and welcome to my code demonstration. In this demonstration, I'm going to show you how I implemented JSON Web Token persistent authorization. And at the same time, I'm just going to abbreviate that to JWT, JSON Web Token, JWT. A quick rundown on how JWT works. Pretty much your server will send a token, which is uniquely generated by that server, and they'll send it to the client when they log in. And the client side will store that token and attach it to all future HTTP requests, which allows the server to authorize them to access certain things. What I did to implement that was I used several Amazon services. The first one I used was API Gateway, and then I used Lambda and then DynamoDB. So here's a quick rundown on how a request works. Client sends a request, the request gets integrated, Lambda performs some work on that request, and then the integration response is actually, I'm using proxy integration, so it's actually managed in Lambda too, and then the client receives a response from the endpoint. So this endpoint, this API is used to create a book. So on the web application, you can see these books. You can, and you can see this right here. It creates a book. I'll go over the Lambda function and how it works real quick, and then I'll show you it in action. But here we go. So here's the Lambda function. I decided to use Python because I haven't coded in Python in a while, but I might change it to JavaScript in the future because I'm just more comfortable with it. So this function receives an event object and a context object, but we pretty much just use that event object. I print that event just to make it easier for debugging purposes. So what that looks like, here's a log. So received event, and then it shows you all that data in a JSON format. And then this is to validate the JSON body to make sure it's correctly formatted. If it isn't, it's going to raise a error, and that's going to tell you, it's going to return that it's an invalid format. And here are the required fields for the books. You need an author, book cover, description, all this. And here it's checking that all those fields are in the HTTP request. And if they're not, it's going to return error code, and it won't hit that endpoint. It won't create that book in the database. I wouldn't worry about this or these 3 lines of code for the header. This is just it's for CORS, which stands for cross-origin resource sharing, and it's a little too much for me to explain right now, but it's required for proxy integration. So instead of, like I said, API Gateway isn't managing the integration response. I am, which is, so proxy integration means I have to manage the, I guess I can't show you what it would look like without proxy integration, but pretty much I'm managing the integration response in Lambda and not through API Gateway. So I have to include these things. I'm creating the ID. So the user doesn't put the ID for the book. It's being generated. And that is so we can maintain uniqueness for each ID. So you can query these books and have it not duplicate IDs and stuff. And the way I maintain uniqueness is by generating that ID off of the request ID. So that HTTP request has an ID, and I'm using that ID as the ID for the book, the item, right? And that maintains uniqueness. Here I'm just pulling values out of that JSON body, so I'll show you the log again. So if you look down here, we have this body tag, and it has all these values, right? Book, author, available. So I'm just pulling those out and putting them into variables. And now I'm creating this item dictionary or object, you could call it, with all these data points that I pulled from the JSON body. And this is using Boto 3, which is a library I imported up here, which creates AWS service clients. So you see Boto 3.resource DynamoDB, which is the database I'm using. So here it is. And then I'm declaring the table, and that table name is actually from the HTTP requests. And I'm putting that, so table.put item, which is putting this item we created into that table. So item equals item data, and then if all that goes well, it's going to return that status code 200, which is okay. Status code 200 means request response okay, something like that. And then headers, don't worry about these. Again, that's the course. And then it's going to give you a message with item with this ID was added to this table. So I'll show you how it works in Postman, and then I will show you how it works in the GUI. So let me swap screens. So here is Postman, which is just a service that lets you test APIs. So I have to, so here you can see in the headers, I have an authorization tag with this long value. This is no longer current JSON web token. So I'm going to get one, and I'll show you how that works. So if I pull up developer console, this token is going to be stored in that local storage. Right now, you can only see this little debug for Honey, which is just an extension I use. So don't worry about that. So I'm going to log in, and when we log in, we can now see this JSON web token. I know that's a little redundant. So JWT token, JSON web token. I'm going to fix that, but I don't know what I was thinking. But for now, that'll work. So we'll take this value, which is returned from the back end, and we'll attach it to this request. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to uncheck it and show you what it looks like without it. So if we send this request without proper authorization, we're going to get a message that says unauthorized, right? Now, if we send it with the authorization token, we're going to get this item was created and put into this table. Now I'll show you a little bit of that body validation. So let's say we take out this author and try to send this again. We're going to get an error, missing fields, author. So we can put that back. So that's good because we don't want to create data or items in the database with missing fields, because that could be a hassle in the future. So I'll show you now how that works with the GUI. And right now it doesn't look great. I didn't style it yet, but it has all the required fields. So let's do test. Put this here. So when we push this, now we can see we have this book, right? And if we look at console, it'll say, don't worry about this. So we didn't get any errors. Error listener indicated async response by returning true to message. Okay, so I'll fix that in the future. But you can see it did create the book. And if we look at the DynamoDB table, we can see it's not just creating a component in the front end, but actually, if we run this query again, you can see this book is here. So it's in the back end. It created that resource. So I'll show you the code, give you a rundown of how that works. Here we go. So here is a component I made, and so I'll just go over it real quick, because if you want to learn more about React and components, I encourage you to just watch the previous videos I made on this web app. But pretty much I'm creating a form component, and these are all just hooks from React Router DOM. And here's a cancel handler. So if I press that cancel button, it's just going to return to the last page. Here's that form. This form is a special component which passes the data in the form to a to a function called an action function. And so instead of just hitting the API endpoint directly, it kind of does some data validation to make sure it's okay. So you fill out that form, you see all these input, so description, book cover. So it's pretty much the logic behind this. So at this is where the functionality comes. You see this function called action, which receives a request, which is that HTTP request. So it hits this before it just goes to that endpoint. And in this function, you can see I am declaring the method as post and getting that data from the form. So, and that's going to be in that request option or request parameter. And the book data, so this is that object that we're sending in the body. So you can see these are static values because the user doesn't type those in, because we want them to stay the same, because we don't want them to be able to upload to different dynamo databases, right? And then we're declaring that endpoint and we're getting this token. So we're going to attach that to the header right here. So authorization token. And this get auth token is imported from this util folder auth. And all it's doing is pulling the token from local storage. So remember I showed you that token in the local storage, local storage.get item JWT token. I'll fix that. I know it's silly. And then it returns the token. And then we're creating that request using the fetch method, which is built into JavaScript. Method equals method, headers, authorization token, and then that body is JSON, this object right here. So book data. And if the response is not okay, it's going to give you this error code, and else if it is okay, it's just going to redirect to that books page. As you saw in action, after I created the book, it just returned to this this page. All right. And that's pretty much it. I think I cannot directly link to this lambda function here, but I will create a file in the Git repo if you want to check this code and copy it. And then all the code in the this right here will also be public, so feel free to check it out. Thank you for watching, and you have a good day, night, whatever time it is over there. Appreciate it.